I'm just going through your tweets that you're sending, and I'm trying to find someone who's got one positive thing to say as to why Sadiq Khan deserves his knighthood. Evie, nothing. Knight Rider, nothing. Brian, nothing. Cosmic Optimus, he's destroyed London. Kelly says, I have a business selling zombie knives and my profits have gone up, so thank you. I mean, I'm sorry I'm not reading them all out, but literally every single one of you. Same story on the texts. Well, Ella Whelan is a journalist and author and has written a piece on this today, actually, as well, and joins us live on the line. Hi there, Ella. Oh, are you there?
Hello.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
We've got you. We have got you. Thanks so much for talking to us here on Talk. So just remind us of the general flair of your piece that you wrote regarding knighthoods.
Well, I mean, obviously, you know, the New Year's Honours list has lots of people in it who are just ordinary citizens who do good things for charity and whatever. And it's you know, if you're into that kind of thing, it's a nice thing for people like that to be recognised. But there's always for every government some level of kind of nod and a wink kind of appointments. You know, the Tories last time round, you know, got their big donor in. It's kind of the same as peerages. You know, it's a way to give credit to people who you need to give credit to and sort of solve political problems. But of all the list of people this year, the two that jumped out to me was Labour MP Emily Thornberry and London Mayor Sadiq Khan. And the reason I just think that these are so egregious is because, you know, they are two politicians, people working in politics who encompass the sneerier elements of Labour, the more kind of, you know, the sort of virulently middle class. They're both anti-Brexit. They encompass that kind of anti-populist sentiment. You know, Thornberry infamously tweeting out that picture of the St George's flag in that kind of nasty way. Sadiq Khan also having said several, you know, too many things to quote in relation to sort of putting down Brexit and people who voted for Brexit, Leave voters as well. And I think it just signals where Labour is at, which is that it's completely dropped off all of its pretense of being a party of the labouring classes. And it's also just kind of, the cynic in me just says, well, Thornberry was left aside for the cabinet, Starmer's cabinet. This was her payoff. Sadiq Khan is, you know, to go to what you said at the beginning of this segment. I mean, he's incredibly popular. Loads of Londoners love him. I'm a Londoner who doesn't love him because I hate what he's doing in relation to road restrictions.
That love him, though? Have you ever actually, because I've never met one. I know he seems to win, and I'm not suggesting any kind of impropriety, but I've never actually met someone face to face who has admitted to loving him.
I've met plenty of them. I mean, it's
we don't go to the same places, clearly.
It's, you know, he's obviously popular among a certain, I don't know, the stereotype is the metropolitan class, people who can afford to, you know, drive electric vehicles, who don't mind the LTNs, who want everything pedestrianised, who don't have to use their car for work, blah, 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 you know. But there's another side to London who really dislike him and wish that he wasn't in power. And the thing about the knighthood means he'll forever have political influence outside of the democratic system. And I think that's, you know, for someone who, you know, there have been scandals around some of his political moves recently. You know, there's suggestion that some of the numbers were, you know, fiddled, less than watertight in relation to some of the ULEZ commissioning and the ULEZ consultations. And I just don't think that kind of behaviour should be rewarded. I'm not a fan of the honours and knighthoods and damehoods as it is anyway, because I'm a Republican, but this just seems like wildly inappropriate. I think these two and
I think that the title of your piece in the Telegraph says that all gongs for Khan and Thornberry are an insult to white van man. And I think you're absolutely right that actually the traditional voter base of Labour actually many years ago probably would have been white van man. However, nowadays many of their policies where they close roads, where they inflict fines on people who have vehicles that aren't very, very new. The vehicles, incidentally, that they encouraged them to buy when they were in government years ago, those diesel vehicles. The congestion around London, the kind of sneering attitude towards those people who are perhaps working class in the trades. There's a sentence in there that you say that essentially it really displays now the importance of being anti those people to Keir Starmer's government. Those people who perhaps are sneering at White Van Man are the people who Keir Starmer is now prioritising.
Yeah, well, it's funny because people, after I've written this article, there's lots of people on Twitter saying, well, what about the Tories? And indeed, the piece is in the Telegraph. It's not exactly the White Van Man paper, is it? It's not a paper of the sort of populist working classes. And the Conservatives, in their own way, were obviously, again, not a voice of the people. But the thing about Labour that always, I think, has to be pointed out is that it has, for a very long time, tried to hold on to the pretense of speaking in favour of the masses, of the working man and woman. Even though slowly their language has changed, obviously dropping that clause under Blair, you can tell that they now often use the term working people. They don't use the term working class, but still pretending like they're for the little people. And that just isn't the case anymore. Substantially, you can see that in their policies, whether it's the sort of row of the two-child benefit cap and all the rest of it, but also just in the fact that there are so many Labour politicians who are loose-lipped around their class prejudice. I mean, there was the Thornbury tweet. There's so many examples. One of my favourites was Shami Chakrabarti, Labour peer, who said at a party conference just a few years ago, begging voters, please don't leave me in the room with Essex Man, because Essex Man is so awful. And there is a prejudice within a lot of the Labour Party that thinks that ordinary men and women, whatever you want to take ordinary to mean, but people who aren't sort of Oxbridge educated living in Islington are thick, are dangerous, are to be patronised. And the reason why Khan and Thornbury's appointments matter, even if the New Year's Honours List doesn't really matter, is that it signals that shift. This is a party that has no interest in the interests of the mass of people who turned away from them in the 2019 election and moved to the Tories, Brexit voters, people who are interested in some kind of different politics. All of that's gone out the window. So it's actually pretty depressing. Well, politics can feel really depressing at the moment.
It really is. And also, the thing I've never understood about Sadiq Khan, I mean, I've been a massive critic of him for years, because to me, if there was and I say this to you as obviously a woman who, you live in London yourself, don't you, Ella?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as a woman living in London, but not just a woman, as a young person who might be living in London as well, if the crime level was the level that it's at when I became mayor, that would be priority number one over everything. Women's safety and young people not stabbing each other would be the two priorities. And ultra-low emission zones and cycle lanes and the things that are almost pushing at an open door, the easy wins that you can then go on stage and say, oh my God, look at all this thing I've done. That I wouldn't give two hoots about that, because it would be making London safe for you and for younger people. And he's failed so miserably on that. And because he's so good at saying, look over here at these cycle lanes and look over here at this low traffic neighbourhood and look over here at these low emission zones that I've brought in, he kind of gets a free pass on it.
I think it's the thing about Khan is that I think his priorities have been all over the place. I mean, actually in the piece I mentioned the fact that he's, been involved in, new memorial for the Atlantic slave trade, fair enough, and has said how that it's essential to, or constantly talk about the historic wrongs of the British Empire, fair enough. If that's your view, you can't then accept, to my mind, you can't then accept a knighthood and a handshake from King Charles and have those two positions at the same time. So he's all about, to me, Khan's all about him promoting himself. He did all these road restrictions and then wrote a book called Breathe, which is about how he's the great saviour of London air quality. On the crime issue, as a born and bred Londoner, grown up in Finsbury Park and in Hackney, living in Hackney for a long time, I think the women's safety issue is a bit of a dodgy example, because women are the vast majority of violence against women and girls happens in the home, in a domestic setting. You're fine walking around London streets. London's great. London is still really great, and I hate the doing down of London and the sort of London has fallen argument. I just don't buy it. I still love my city. I still think it's a brilliant place to live and to go out, as a woman or anyone else. But if in relation to your point about knife crime, you know, there's a serious issue going on with, in particular, young men in lots of cities, but in London being a big one. And the sort of discussion about knife crime tends to be on a very superficial level of getting, you know, well-meaning celebrities in to do something around zombie knives, rather than looking at the real issues behind it, what is actually causing young guys to go out and try to kill each other. And I think we need to be having these more substantial arguments, which Sadiq Khan isn't interested in doing.
It's a hard problem to solve, and going back to the point about the easy wins, it's far easier to talk about the racism of the Atlantic slave trade, and you're right, it's an important subject, but it's far easier to talk about that and unveil a statue to that and the racism of that, rather than talk about young black men mainly, and other races, but mainly young black men that are actually killing each other. That's a much more difficult problem to solve, so therefore it's far easier to say, well, look over here instead at this statue of the slave trade that I'm concentrating on, rather than solve this really important problem over here. And that to me it will be the legacy of Sadiq Khan. And actually that to me is why, as a politician, he's brilliant, because he manages to divert a lot of people's attention to the virtue signals rather than the problems being solved.
Indeed. I mean, I said it already, but the interesting thing about Sadiq Khan is that if you look at his track record, because he's someone from as he's very fond of boasting about,
yes,
a very kind of ordinary background. You know, he's not one of these people, politicos who've been shipped in like a lot of the Labour Party, born and bred into the political system, and son of a bus driver and blah, blah, blah. But everything that he's done in a position in power as London mayor has been about a kind of particular London identity, which is very sort of environmentally friendly, green, and by that I mean sort of restrictive, trying to stop Londoners from getting around, the kind of causes he's backed up in. I mean, he goes on and on and on about misogyny, making misogyny a hate crime, doing this and that for women. It's a sort of it's a way of looking like you're doing something rather than actually doing anything substantial. And then discussions about crime or London streets also amount to very little in reality changing. Previous mayors, I'm not trying to say we're any better. Boris Johnson, Ken Livingstone did some, pretty terrible things for London. But there's something about Sadiq Khan that is, in the way in which he's promoting himself as sort of a saviour. I just can't believe he had the gall to write that book. It's just so, it's so gauche. It's so unself-aware. I think that's what really irks people about him, is that, he is wildly unpopular among a large section of working class Londoners. He has made life impossible for taxi drivers, anyone, any labourer, anybody who's a plumber, my husband's a tree surgeon, a builder, anyone who needs to carry things around in a car with them to work. Lorry drivers who are delivering stuff to Sainsbury's. It's miserable. Yeah. It is miserable driving in London.
And I know for a fact, we've got to end it there, but Hackney is one of the worst places for it. Yes. I'm Lambeth, so I feel your pain, because they're sort of hand in hand with the absolute...
You were where it all started.
Yeah, exactly, with the misery of just not being able to drive anywhere when you've got a van full of stuff. It's ridiculous. Your husband should be on a bike with those trees. Indeed, Ella. Yeah. How dare he not bother with that? Listen, thanks so much for that. That's Ella Whelan, journalist and author. Her brilliant pieces in The Telegraph. And I think that sums it up really well, actually, what she said. It's a betrayal to white van man. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that premise that white van man, that sort of working class person who is I hate working class as a term, but you get what I'm getting, the class of person working in a trade, needing to get there from A to B, perhaps not university educated, who just wants to earn a crust. It's that person with aspiration that is being perhaps finding something brown and smelly coming on their head from very, very far above.